Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, March 14th, 2022. I call the meeting to order and ask that Commissioner Toller lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Toller. Anna, roll call, please.
Chair D'Erico,
Here.
Vice Chair Zick,
Here.
Commissioner Rojas,
Here.
Commissioner Toller,
Here.
Commissioner Russell,
Here.
Commissioner Vivar,
Here.
Commissioner Arith.
Present.
Please note that Commissioner Arith is present via Zoom.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have no public may have a couple of public comments. We have no announcements and presentations tonight. And that brings us to public comment. Public comment portion of the meeting is for opportunity for the public to address the Planning Commission on matters that are not on tonight's agenda. So Julie or Anna, do we have any phone calls or anyone in chambers wishing to speak to the commission tonight?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anyone in chambers wish to address the commission on a matter not on tonight's agenda? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, we'll close public comment. That brings us to commissioner comments, and we'll begin with Commissioner Rojas. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I only have a comment. Glad to be back. Good to be here amongst you guys, and looking forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Vivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nothing specific tonight, but good to be here, and yeah, looking forward to tonight's meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Arith.
Thank you, Chair. No comments this evening.
Okay, Commissioner Toller.
I have a couple of announcements. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Councilmember Reynolds, for the last few years, has been organizing community bike rides, and one is coming up. Mark your calendars. It's Sunday, March 27th. It's going to be starting at the Historical Society that's in Lions Park at 2 p.m. And I encourage everybody, if you can, to try to make it. They're really fun. I've learned, well, it's an opportunity to explore different parts of the city that you probably wouldn't otherwise. I've learned about new trails that I hadn't thought of, ways to get across town that I hadn't thought of. And it's a good opportunity to do that. I have started riding my bike here, and I live in the middle of East Side, and it took me 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes. It took me 13 minutes to get here. And previously I always drove here because it was kind of uncomfortable because I would take Fair Drive. It took me a while to realize, no, you take Vanguard. Fair is the wrong way to go. And so when that clicked, I found a new route, and I thought, oh, shoot, that's easy. I could do that. And I didn't even break a sweat. It took just a few minutes. And so these rides are really cool for those purposes. And we try to plan the routes so they're fairly family friendly and easy. You don't need to wear Lycra. A lot of people are just riding cruisers. Some kids come along. I think bicycling is an important thing to always be pushing for in our city, because I think it's the perfect speed to get around a city of our size. But if you don't like riding bikes, if you don't ride bikes, there's the first ever community walk. That's going to be the day before. That's Saturday, March 26th. Going to start at 8 a.m., meeting at Neat Coffee. That's on 19th and Pomona. And last announcement, I don't have a lot of details about this, but on Saturday, April 23rd, a kindness festival is going to take place. I don't even know where it's going to be, but there's going to be entertainment, inflatables, food, family fun. Just mark your calendars for now. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Toller. Commissioner Russell?
No comments tonight, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Zick.
Nothing tonight.
Okay, and I have no comments tonight. And that will bring us to the consent calendar. We have some items on the consent calendar tonight. Anna, could you read those real quick into the record, what we're considering? I'm sorry if I caught you off guard.
Consent calendar, item 1, minutes, the recommendation, Planning Commission approve the minutes of the meetings of February 22nd, 2021, March 8th, 2021, and April 12th, 2021.
Okay, thank you, Anna, very much. Commissioners, are there anybody wish to pull any of those items? Okay, Commissioner Vivari? Oh, no. Okay, anyone in the public wish to pull any of the items for separate consideration? Seeing none, the chair, will move approval of the consent calendar. Is there a second? Okay, motion by the chair and a seconded by Commissioner Vivar. Julie, please, Anna, I'm sorry, please call the roll.
Chair D'Arco,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zick,
Aye.
Commissioner Rojas,
Aye.
Commissioner Toller,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Vivar,
Aye.
Commissioner Arith.
Yes.
That motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioners. Thank you, Anna. No public hearings tonight. That brings us to old business. Anna, could you please read that into the record?
Old business item number 1, cannabis retail storefront and non-storefront regulations, informational presentation. Please note that we have not received any public comments on this item.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Drapkin. Take 2.
Good evening, Chair and Vice Chair and members of the Commission. I'm glad to be in front of you again. This is a follow-up presentation for cannabis retail CUP reviews. It's a follow-up from the last presentation at the last hearing for the Planning Commission. And it's in regard to responding to some of the comments and questions that the Commission had. At the previous Commission presentation, staff gave information specifically regarding retail cannabis regulations and permit procedures. The Commission had many questions and comments, which staff has summarized in this slide. The first 6 topics staff has prepared a report on with this agenda, and staff will follow up with the second half at the PC hearing at the end of the month. Tonight's presentation will focus on these first 6 topics.
So, real quick interruption. I'm not getting the presentation up my screen. No big deal. I can see the screen up here. So go ahead and proceed. I didn't. There's a bit of a technical glitch, but it's okay. I can see that far.
During previous hearing, the Commission was interested in further details in regard to cannabis separation requirements. The requirements for cannabis retail locations are indicated on this slide and includes 1,000 feet minimum distances from schools, daycares, playgrounds, and homeless shelters, and 600 feet from youth centers. In addition, the regulations also include separation. It does not include separation requirements from the proposed other retail cannabis facilities or a cap in the number of cannabis total facilities in the city. Just to be clear, it does not include those. Security is an important aspect of cannabis retail regulations. Many cannabis security measures are included in the city's ordinances to avoid cannabis and cannabis-related product to enter into the black market and also to prevent underage usage. Another important aspect of security is to ensure that these facilities do not create an unnecessary burden on the city's police department resources with enforcement of criminal activities such as breaking and entering or other related enforcement issues. This slide shows a short list of several of the important required security measures with cannabis establishments. These measures include 24-hour security, adequate exterior lighting, video security systems, relocating cannabis products in secure locations after hours, and regulating specific business hours. Cannabis retail establishments are parked using the same standard as other retail uses in the city. Staff researched many cities that allow for cannabis dispensaries and discussed parking demand with their local staff. The consensus of this research was was that most of the cities were using their standard retail parking provisions, and this standard was working adequately. As with many of the cities researched, the parking requirements for retail were 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area, which is the same as City of Costa Mesa. The Planning Commission at the last hearing had several questions in regard to cannabis retail advertising and signage requirements. Cannabis retail signage is generally regulated the same as other retail stores in the city, with some additional requirements. These include not being allowed to use cannabis or cannabis merchandise in graphic form, not allowing outdoor display, no temporary signage, such as A-frames or sandwich boards, and none of those sign twirlers. Future cannabis retail projects being reviewed by the Planning Commission require public notice. Similar to other CUPs reviewed by the Planning Commission, this notice is provided and includes a requirement for direct mailing to all property owners within 500 feet and direct mailing to all occupants within 500 feet also, posting the site, a newspaper notification, and this all occurs 10 days before the hearing. Several of the commissioners at the last presentation had questions and comments about the previous tenants and the potential to have vacancy periods for some of the city's retail locations as applicants are awaiting approval of CUPs for new retail cannabis establishments. Although this is not normally an avenue that the city gets directly involved with, staff has compiled some information for the commission in this regard. Generally, of the 35 applications that staff is currently processing for retail cannabis CUPs, approximately half of them are occupied with tenants. The current retail sites have or are occupied by many retail uses. Some of these uses include restaurants, a spa showroom, pet grooming, barbecue sales, flower shop, auto repair, donut shop, and numerous other uses. Staff has spoken to several tenants of the existing retail sites, and they have or are looking for other sites currently. Some of those retail tenants were paid to get out of their leases early. Several of the sites have deferred maintenance issues and long-term vacancies, which may be rectified with the new CUP applications and the tenant improvements associated with them. And some of the sites that are currently vacant have been vacant since before the adoption of Measure Q. Staff will be providing the commission with one more presentation to go over several important items for their consideration of cannabis retail CUPs. For these items, applicable subject matter expert staff will be available for commissioner questions and clarifications. This hearing will occur on the 28th of this month and include information like background checks, traffic analysis, getting into the details with the CUP findings and providing some examples, cannabis business taxes, making the proper CEQA determinations, and inventory after potential closures was some of the issues that were brought up at the last commission that are still need some review, which will occur. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available to answer and respond to questions of the commission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Drapkin. I'm going to just, I'm going to go by microphone lights, and I saw Vice Chair Zick and Commissioner Vivar, so we'll start with Commissioner Vivar.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation and for getting back to all of our many questions from last meeting, staff. Very, very helpful to get that information compiled for us. So I had a bunch of questions on this. So first question is related to the a note I saw in here in the report, staff report about a permit not being given out to a location where previous illegal cannabis activity has happened before. So is that a permit cannot be given 1 year after the last previous incident, or that an application cannot be made 1 year before 1 year after that incident?
Chair, if I may respond to that question.
Sure.
Thank you. The Title IX of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code prohibits any location that has been the site of a previous illegal cannabis activity within 1 year from obtaining a cannabis permit or from staff processing that permit till 1 year has elapsed. In addition, the owner is also required to reimburse the city for all costs of abatement expenses prior to permit issuance.
Great. Next question I had is regarding security. So the notes here again say that at least one security guard who is licensed has to be on the premises at all times, 24 hours a day. So besides this one licensed security person, all other personnel have to be, do all other security personnel on site also have to be licensed? And how is the city going to go about making sure that all of those serving as security are indeed licensed?
Commissioner Vivar, this is Nancy, Nancy Quinn, Senior Planner. I can answer that question for you. There's actually something within Title IX that does require all security personnel to be licensed by the state's Bureau of Security and Investigative Services personnel.
Okay. And so what's interesting to me is, so there's one licensed security person is supposed to be on site at all times. But, you know, of course, some of these locations will be, I don't know, 800 square feet and others will be 4,000 square feet. So would there be anything requiring more than one security person on site for these larger locations? Or is it still just the requirement of the one minimum?
Commissioner Vivar, if I understand you correctly, is there anything that would require an additional security guard, given if, for example, if there's a larger dispensary?
Correct, yeah.
So currently, the code just requires one security guard, licensed security guard for 24 hours on site. So that's what the regulation are currently with the city.
So, like,
However, there are applicants that do intend to provide additional security guard.
okay. So there isn't like any correlation, like per every 800 square feet, you need one security guard, or per every 1,000 or whatever it is. Nothing like that, right?
No, there's nothing like that.
Okay.
I just wanted to weigh in here quickly. Jennifer, Lead Director of Development Services. The idea here was to establish minimum requirements for security, but beyond that, it is essentially the responsibility of each of the applicants and businesses to provide a security plan that's appropriate, and staff does take a look at the security plan, but largely the number of personnel, we expect them to be scaled based on the size of the building, but the details of that we are leaving to the applicants to determine for their own businesses.
Okay. Regarding storage of the cannabis and cannabis products after hours, so that includes anything out in like display cases, display cabinets, all that has to be stored at the end of each business day?
That is correct.
Okay. And then regarding being able to remain operational in case of a blackout or power outage, what's meant by remain operational? Does that mean that the kind of business has its, would have its own sort of backup generator or something that it would have on site, and that it would continue to sort of function like as a business even with loss of power?
Yes, Commissioner Vivar, the kind of the requirement that you shall remain operational in power outage is more intended for like the access control doors. So like, for example, employees don't get locked in.
Sure, of course.
In case of power outage, like anyone can still leave the premises safely.
Okay. So that just more refers to that rather than like say lighting or the other things.
Of course, that as
yeah.
well too,
Right.
so that the business can still remain operational and still function for the day-to-day business, but still remain safe and secure.
I see. Yeah. Okay. And then some kind of like, so the plan, the energy plan would have to be submitted, I guess, to the city as well on like what kind of alternative energy sources they would have on site for in case of that, right?
That would be reviewed during the plan check.
Okay, plan check. Great. Next comment I'd like to make is regarding the notices. So again, in the notes specify that any residents or occupants of other commercial spaces within an 800-foot radius need to be notified, but would that also include any occupant of the location itself? Because just from personal experience, sometimes the landlords aren't very transparent with this kind of stuff, and sometimes maybe for some of these locations, the tenants currently occupying the spaces might not realize that an application is in for cannabis until planning commission happens.
Yes,
or
Commissioner
afterwards.
Vivar, I did confirm with staff that the noticing requirements do include tenants of different spaces for the within 500 feet.
Okay, great. And the next question, I spoke with staff earlier about this, but about the advertising and the flyers. So as I understood it, retail cannabis businesses can put out things like mailers or flyers as long as they're not like attractive to children, I think it was. Right.
Yes, Commissioner Vivar, thank you. The city has a handbill circulation code provision, which talks about the rules and regulations with putting flyers out, essentially. And it basically says that they can't be put out in public places or on vehicles prohibited, and that unless the owner or occupant of any motor vehicle chooses to receive that. So it's kind of odd language, but it does say that. And then with regards to the advertising directed towards children, the state requirements for cannabis, they have their own Department of Cannabis regulations. They restrict advertising that's directed towards use.
Okay. And I have a question that might possibly be answered by city attorney, but regarding the, so there was something in the notes that were provided to us in the staff report that the planning commission may have appropriate considerations for sort of advertising and flyers related to litter control and unsolicited sort of advertising and whatnot. So might the city attorney kind of step in and answer like what we could do within the bounds of our jurisdiction for like what could be appropriate and legal considerations for this?
Thank you, Commissioners. The Planning Commission has considerable discretion when it comes to issuing conditional use permits and putting conditions against advertising and handbills on a particular application as it deems appropriate, i.e. to avoid handbills, paper flyers falling into the hands of children, creating litter and so forth. So while it's not clearly expressly prohibited by the code, and bear in mind that the provisions for handbills and flyers, for the most part, date from 1975 in the city's municipal code. That doesn't stop the Planning Commission from appropriately conditioning any particular application or generally commercial cannabis applications from prohibiting flyers.
And so there isn't like, because I guess what I'm worried about is maybe instances in which like a consideration that we might create for approval might infringe on, say, free speech rights and whatnot. And so that was just kind of why I was asking that question.
So in terms of free speech rights, I understand your concerns. However, cannabis is a highly regulated activity. The city is under no mandate to allow cannabis to begin with. So to prohibit flyers does not prohibit communications in all medium, but it does simply prohibit flyers. And if the Planning Commission wanted to have a condition of approval that prohibited paper flyers on the grounds that it leads to litter on city streets, paper flyers could fall into the hands of children, et cetera, that would be a justifiable condition of approval, notwithstanding any right that cannabis may have or may not have to distribute flyers.
So one of the considerations of not allowing this advertising to fall into the hands of children, does that mean that, for example, the Planning Commission could prohibit mailers for cannabis to go out to homes?
Mailers is a slightly different category. It would fall back to the sign code itself, but the Planning Commission could, in its discretion, prohibit unsolicited advertisements in the same way that it has the discretion to prohibit direct handout of leaflets and handbills and so forth.
Okay, thank you, City Attorney, for that. And let's see, final concluding comments, questions here. So one of my questions that I have as well is there was a note in the information about the this is directed to city staff, but one of the notes in the staff report about the displacement of businesses, there was something in there about a note that there are some locations where code enforcement violations have happened, like code violations. So is that referring to illegal cannabis operations or just code enforcement violations as a whole?
Commissioner Vivara, that is referring to property maintenance and other zoning code violations that are still occurring at the property or have not been resolved yet. It does not necessarily mean it was a prior illegal dispensary. Furthermore, because of that whole 1-year ban, if you will, one of the dispensary, past illegal dispensary may not necessarily be able to be eligible to apply. But to answer your original question, it's related to property maintenance.
Right. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the list, the information as well. I was very concerned about the displacement of businesses, and it's interesting to know that half of them could be displaced. And of course, as Scott mentioned earlier, some of them seem to already have plans to go. Others might not know that somebody has put in an application for the business where they're at, and they might not know until those little mailers go out, or the little the meeting announcements for when that would go up in Planning Commission hearings. And of course, it would be kind of labor intensive to go into the weeds on this and see, well, how many of these that could be possibly displaced. Not just these 15, but whatever other businesses in the other 30 or so applications, because we have to remember there are 64 applications we've received, and there's 35 are apparently ready to go for reviews, more or less. But besides these 15 businesses that could be displaced, there's a number of others that could be displaced in the following 30 applications that we still have to see after these 35. So I still worry about the effects on small businesses, mom and pop shops, family-owned businesses that, many of whom which may not have the capital to be able to move their business operations. My family's a small business, are small business owners themselves, and so I understand the difficulties in, first of all, finding another place in Costa Mesa that has rent that's okay, and the cost of conditioning another commercial unit for your particular business, and that's not even considering as well moving all of your stuff, all of your physical assets from your current location to the new one. And the pandemic has severely impacted businesses, and especially small businesses. So I just fear that many, especially small and family-owned businesses, may not necessarily have the capital to move their business operations after, such a difficult past 2 years in the business commercial world. So that's just a comment, reflection, but yeah. So thank you so much, city staff. I spoke to city staff earlier, so thank you for your willingness to go over our questions and for this very thorough presentation as well, and for answering all my questions and the other commissioners' questions as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Arith, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. I do. I want to start off by thanking city staff for holding a rather lengthy and very substantive conversation with me the other day. I got a lot out of it, so thank you for your time. I'll start off by directing us to page 2 of the staff report in terms of buffer zones. And I'll ask the question, are there buffer zones around child-focused businesses such as pediatricians' offices, K through 12 tutoring centers, and pediatric dentistry, among other related businesses?
Commissioner Arith, I can respond to that. There are not other separation requirements beyond the ones that were covered in Mr. Jopkin's presentation. During the preparation of the ordinance, several separation distances were considered by the City Council, and those included some of the things that you've listed here this evening, and ultimately the Council decided to focus on the sensitive uses that are listed in the ordinance and did not go beyond that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Lee. We'll go to the end of page 5, beginning of page 6, in terms of off-site advertising. I guess it starts off by, talking about the collateral and the mailers and so forth, and my colleague Commissioner Vivar went over that. Does the city have any restrictions on advertising throughout the city, such as on billboards? Just not anything other than on-site or mailer or handouts.
Commissioner Arith, a couple of things there. The city's sign code includes a number of restrictions on signage in terms of maximum sign area, sign location, and other very common sign regulations like that. So the sign code is what ultimately regulates what on-site signage could be associated with a cannabis business, along with some of the additional regulations that were discussed this evening in the presentation. If you're talking about other sort of existing off-site billboards in the city, I think we can look into that a little bit more. I don't have an answer this evening, but I can bring that back to our next presentation at the next meeting.
That would be great. Thank you, Ms. Lee. And I think lastly, for the sake of kind of fostering a little bit of discussion, I assume that on the CUPs that'll be coming to us, we'll have a list of the business owners. Is that correct?
sorry, I'm not sure I understood your question.
So
One more time, please.
my apologies. So when we have the items come to us, we'll have a list of the business owners, people who actually own these businesses. Is that correct?
Yes, as part of the staff report, we list the authorized agent for the applicant as well as the property owner and the business name, either the LLC or the DBA.
Okay. And those DBAs, or at least, so let's say that there are multiple owners within the business. Would we be seeing the names of those multiple business owners set from a certain point of percentage ownership?
No, what we would list on the staff report is typically the application entity. It's the business, it's the property owner and the business owner operator. So if there's an LLC, for example, and it has a number of different owners behind it, we would not list each one of those individual owners on the application.
Okay. And what is ownership set at in terms of what's publicly facing for retail cannabis?
I'm going to ask our city attorney's office to weigh in a little bit here. We're getting into some of the details of the percentages of ownership and application requirements. So we'll tag team this response a little bit.
Thank you.
Mr. Preziosi.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Arth, generally 20% is considered an ownership interest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Preziosi. And where does that 20% come from in terms of interest in the business, in terms of what's publicly facing? Is that something that's carried over from a previous code or ordinance?
So it's in Title IX, I believe, and it's also in the administrative regulations.
Okay. So it's not, this 20% listing is not specific to cannabis. This is for any business that comes to us on Planning Commission. Is that correct?
No, this is specific to cannabis. This is what we're talking about.
Okay.
So if I could just answer your question a little generally. Generally, planning applications, when staff is drafting the staff report, they only list the applicant and the name of the business and/or the name of the property owner, if different. So that's the city's custom for staff reports, whether they're cannabis or any other type of conditional use permit.
Okay. All right. So it's set at 20%. All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Commissioner Russell?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Commissioner Vivar for his questions regarding the flyers. That was a concern of mine. And just as a comment, I would like to see us consider making that just a permanent condition that they can't hand out flyers. Secondly, on page 6, it talks about the first paragraph that there would be a sign visibly posted that smoking, ingesting, and otherwise consuming cannabis on the premises or in the areas adjacent. How do we define areas adjacent?
So I don't exactly know how we would define that. I don't think it's specifically regulated with regards to a measurement. I do know, however, that the conditions do include the property owner, or will include that the property owner and the business owner and his staff will also regulate these things. Okay. So if that
That's helpful, yeah, because it's a similar issue on page 3 where it talks about that they can't, they have to leave the premises and not consume cannabis in the vicinity. And again, does that mean they can get in their car and do it? Does that mean that they just walk off of the property and that, that seems like that could be a problem for neighbors.
Yeah, it talks about loitering, and then also the security will be handling that from an outside perspective also.
Okay.
Yeah, the conditions will include loitering.
All right, thank you.
if I might, just a quick follow-up question, maybe of Mr. Preziosi. So a cannabis retail store in a center, and that center is privately owned. But I think from a legal perspective, what I'd be interested in knowing is it, and I don't know, is it legal to consume cannabis in a public space outdoors or even on private property outdoors?
So it's generally legal to smoke cannabis where cigarettes may be smoked.
Okay,
That's the general prohibition.
okay,
It's not legal to smoke cannabis inside automobiles under state law.
sure, okay. All right, that helps me. Thank you very much. Vice Chair Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, staff, for the considerable amount of time and thought that you put into this. I think the end objective is to have clear, unambiguous conditions of approval as we begin processing the many applications. And my first question in that regard is, if we approve, as we're trying to anticipate every possible situation and maybe miss something, and we approve an application with a set of conditions, later find out that there are things happening that we would want to avoid. Maybe in this example of Commissioner Russell's question about consumption off-site and what that might look like, and maybe we didn't anticipate it. Can we revisit the conditions of approval for an approved application and alter those conditions?
If they're in violation of their existing conditions, that's an easier answer. I think your question would be better answered by the city attorney.
Okay, yeah, I'm asking the harder question.
It's a little bit harder than that question, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Zick. I understand the question. Generally, absent a change in circumstance at the location or being in violation, generally the Planning Commission does not call up a conditional use permit and then add additional conditions to it, absent a violation or some physical change to the property.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so I've got several questions, and I'll kind of take them in order of the numbered items that you've covered in this staff report. So with regard to the separation requirements, in the case of K through 12 schools, is the measurement from the school property line?
That is correct.
Okay, and will you say that somewhere? Does that say that in our ordinance, for example, the property line of a K through 12 school?
Yes, it does in Title 13.
Okay,
I don't have the specific section, but yes, it does say to the closest property line of the sensitive use.
okay. And then with regard to the other end of that measurement, meaning the cannabis business, and you refer to the premises, which can be an ambiguous term because premises can include land and parking areas of a leased property. So is it your intention to say the building premises?
So premises is as defined per, I think it's the Business and Professions Code from the state, which boiled down is the building of the licensed premise, which is not necessarily the building, because there are situations where there are properties, proposed locations that are within a multi-tenant building, so it would be whatever the exact space is, tenant space is.
The demised improvement, okay.
And Vice Chair Zick, you may remember, as we've reviewed Measure X applications, there's always an exhibit that shows the identified licensed premises of each of these cannabis proposals, and those are for state license purposes as well as the city. So essentially, we're using those delineated licensed premises to measure from.
Okay, thank you. And then with regard to playgrounds, the language in the staff report refers to the property line of a playground being measured from a 30-foot radius from the exterior physical boundaries of the playground equipment. And I recall from the council discussion, and maybe that's what this is trying to refer to, is that the council did not want to use the property line where a playground existed, but they were more interested in the equipment. So my question or thought is, by using the term property line of the playground, it kind of mixes words in a way that I think is potentially confusing. And maybe what you're trying to convey is the boundary line of the playground, and then you're defining that boundary line in terms of the radius from playground equipment. So am I right about that, or are you really referring to a property line?
No, I think you're correct, Vice Chair Zick. I think the intention is essentially a boundary line around the playground, and that is the measurement point. I think property line is used as a reference because it was used elsewhere in the ordinance for textual purposes. So we just wanted to be consistent. But yeah, I can see the confusion there. The intent is boundary line.
Okay, and then with regard to what's referred to as playground equipment, would a permanently installed baseball backstop be considered playground equipment?
So at the time that the council was deliberating on this point, there was an awful lot of discussion about what exactly the definition of playground equipment was. And essentially, we landed on some sort of guidance essentially from the council. I think at the end of the day, what the city has done really for mapping purposes, and we have a map that's posted on the city's cannabis website, we've essentially mapped what we believe are playgrounds. It primarily focuses on traditional playground equipment. It's not necessarily a backstop. It's more a tot lot or somewhere that you would expect playground equipment, children to be playing on playground equipment in the traditional sense. So it's a little bit of an art there, and we'll look into the definition a little more and see if I can provide any more clarity than I have at the next meeting.
So would it be possible then that the definition of this item would not so much be a collection of words, but would be a graphical exhibit?
Commissioner Zick, if I might interrupt the director, we do have a definition for the playground, and I think staff is available to give it to you if you'd like. It's written in our Title IX with the business permits. So it is rather lengthy, but it probably will solidify some of your questions, at least respond to them. But we might have to respond back if it doesn't, but let's give it a shot.
Okay, I'll move on then. And so then with regard to this issue of the, still under the separation, the last paragraph of the item that's referring to the 1-year permit limitation if there was an illegal activity there. My question about that item is, number one, do you have a list of all these locations? And of these locations, do you have dates where the business has ceased operation? And for these businesses, have you quantified the dollar value of the city expenditure for which you would need to be reimbursed prior to a permit being issued for that location?
So Vice Chair Zick, essentially what staff has done is that we have cross-referenced the application locations with the list of code enforcement sites, and particularly illegal dispensaries that have been reported over time. We do have specific dates, and when the situation comes up, we do have a procedure in place to calculate the cost that would be required to be reimbursed.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, security requirements. So there must be at least one licensed private security guard. Is that armed, unarmed, or we don't care?
It does not specify armed or unarmed, so we would leave it up to the applicant.
Okay. And to Commissioner Vivar's question about additional security guards, is a security guard, let's see, your answer to a question he asked was that any security guard they have must be licensed. And so my question about that is, how do I know what a security guard is? So if I ask about this individual and I say, are you a security guard? And I find out he's not licensed, and then he says, well, no, I'm not a security guard, I'm just an employee. Is the security guard going to be always in uniform or plain clothes, or do we not care?
My understanding is that security guards cannot be hired directly by the cannabis company. They actually have to be a third party. And so, yes, they would be employed by a security company that presumably is licensed per the state and would be in the proper attire.
Okay, thank you. And then the indication in that first bullet point is that the security guard shall be present 24 hours a day. Because there's the limitation on the hours of operation of the retail businesses, is this security guard going to be inside the premises, outside the premises, or potentially both?
I believe it would be outside, to kind of secure the premises and monitoring any activity in the evening when the business is closed.
Okay, would we care? And if we do care, would you include that specificity in the condition of approval?
So the commission can definitely specify that as they review each CUP before the commission.
Okay, I'm not sure at this point if I care if they're inside or outside. I'm asking your intention at this point.
So the facility itself, the building or the tenant space would be secured inside and outside because of the cameras as well as the alarm system. From a security land use perspective, staff would be more concerned with the securing the outside, the area in the evening, since there could be potentially unwanted activity that occurs outside.
Okay. And then the fifth bullet point that talks about the after-hours cannabis products being secured in a locked container. If the display cases have locks on them, do they qualify as a locked container?
Commissioner Zick, I will address that question. So each applicant is required to submit a security plan. That security plan is reviewed by HDL. The type of locking container would need to be specified in the security plan. It would need to be reviewed by HDL, and whether it was sufficient or insufficient would be reported to staff. If it was insufficient, we go back to the applicant to address that security plan. If it was sufficient, then it would move forward to the Planning Commission for the review. Planning Commission, of course, can ask questions and, of course, condition the application further regarding security if it's not convinced that the application is, or the location is sufficiently secure.
Is it conceivable that this locked container could actually be a lockable room rather than a container?
I believe it's a term of art, whether it's a container. Again, I would fall back on the city's securities consultant, HDL, to determine whether or not a locked room, if it was a safe-like room, was sufficient as a container. I believe that's best left to the security consultant.
Okay.
And Commissioner Zick, staff could come back with some information from HDL with regard to some of those specifics, I think, for the next hearing.
Okay. I'm just kind of trying to wring out what our intent is. So, all right. So moving on, I'm on page 4 now. And again, following up on Commissioner Vivar's questions, which I thought were, as a whole, excellent. The question about remaining operational during a power outage. And I kind of understood the answer, but I want to make sure I completely understand the intent. And one idea that I heard in the answer was that if the power goes out, we don't want people accidentally locked in rooms or locked out of rooms, locked in the business, potentially locked out of the business accidentally. So I heard that part of the answer. I understand that part of the answer. But then I also heard something along the lines when the question about lighting was brought up, about, yes, we'd want the lighting to work and anything else that they would need to remain operational in the event of a power outage. And when I hear that, that tells me we're talking about more than just battery-powered emergency lighting, exit lighting. We're talking about all equipment, all plug load, and that then is necessitating backup power generation. And is that really what your intention is? Is that these cannabis businesses will have backup power generation in the event of a power outage? So they can still conduct business, sell products, et cetera?
Commissioner Zick, if I could clarify earlier, it's more to also make sure that the facility itself remains secure, so that it's especially the access control doors, because as soon as you lose the access control, the facility no longer is secure, and then anybody could kind of go in, and, if you will. So that's really what's more intended for, is while we would like to the business to remain operational best of their ability, it's really more of, as I mentioned earlier, kind of safe and securing the site in an event of a power outage.
Okay.
We also want to ensure that the security cameras remain operational. That's also one of the primary
Correct.
issues. So from staff's perspective, I mean, certainly if it's during business hours and the power goes out, we have a intention that the business should probably stay open, but that's not our concern. Our primary concern is ensuring that these security facilities stay operational, which is the security cameras and the access control primarily.
And thank you. I think that's a better way of saying it. You want the security systems to remain operational. You want the ingress, egress systems to remain operational. Okay.
And one more thing I might want to add on, just at the end of the day, the security guard is still there. So we'll still have the security guard 24 hours.
Yes.
So regardless of the conditions of the energy.
Got it. So the hours of operations, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., clearly that is related to the retail storefronts. What about the delivery businesses coming out of Measure X? Are they able to deliver earlier than 7 a.m. and later than 10 p.m.?
Deliveries are also subject to the same hours as a storefront. So the 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is for all retail cannabis uses, regardless if you have a storefront or not.
Okay, so the CUP or MCUPs or modified CUPs that you've done for the Measure X zone that allow delivery, restrict the hours of delivery to these same times?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't notice that. Thank you. All right, so parking. You indicate that the parking requirement for these businesses would be the 4 per thousand for retail, and you also indicate that existing non-conforming businesses might not be parked at 4 per thousand, and they would therefore be grandfathered as existing non-conforming. My question is, first question is, when did the 4 per thousand begin in our code as a parking requirement for retail?
I would not know that off the top of my head, but I could definitely come back for the next meeting on that question. Certainly figure that out.
Okay.
I'll just say it was a long time ago.
Probably was.
Well, if it was I'd be interested to know, because if it was a long time ago, then I would kind of expect that with use changes for many of these locations, we probably won't have too many underparked businesses. So we'll find out. Okay, next, the advertising regulations, et cetera. There's an indication that says the Costa Mesa Municipal Code specifies cannabis business identification signage shall be limited for needs of identification only. Later, we talk about things that can't be displayed in the windows. So my question about the name of the cannabis business, do we have the right of approval or disapproval for the cannabis business name? If their cannabis business name was something, I don't want to make one up, it might be too good and somebody will use it. But if it was clearly reflective of the kind of business it was, the kind of products they sold, would that be a business name that we would have no problem with being plastered up on the wall?
Commissioner Zick, I'll answer that question. So generally, the city, the planning department and the planning commission does not approve the names of businesses. However, in the rare instance when the name of the business was so graphically displayed that it sort of ran afoul of the prohibition of depicting cannabis graphics, then that might give the commission some power or ability to regulate how that is displayed.
Okay. Thank you for that. So on this thing about the flyer dissemination, it probably hasn't been much of a problem in our city over the years, which might explain why we have this very ambiguous term that you included in quotations, which I assume comes straight out of our code, that the dissemination can only be to any person willing to accept it, which kind of implies that you can't put it under the windshield wiper of empty cars because it'd be pretty hard to establish that a person was willing to accept that. Would that be a true statement?
That would be correct.
Okay. And businesses, there are a lot of businesses that run around residential neighborhoods leaving flyers and such on doorsteps. Would these cannabis businesses be prohibited from doing that as well under this same rather loose criteria?
Correct.
Okay. And what about a cannabis business that wants to mail out materials through the U.S. Postal Service? Is there any prohibition for them doing that? Blanketing a zip code in our city with flyers through the mail that they're now open for business.
So there is an exemption to the handbill circulation provisions in section 9-138, and it talks about the provision of this article shall not apply to the distribution of the United States mail, nor to delivery of any handbill or any other printed or written advertising matter to any person who has requested delivery of the same. So it exempts U.S. mail from that.
Okay.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Zick, if I could jump in real quick. I don't know if
Sure, go ahead.
if the city attorney would know, but as a follow-on to that, is there any U.S. postal regulation that prohibits the advertising or the marketing of cannabis through the?
It's highly likely that there is a postal prohibition against it because cannabis is a Schedule I drug under federal law and is prohibited.
And then my last comment, it's not so much a question, but it relates to a note in the staff report, bottom of page 6. And I think this was, I'm not sure which commissioner kind of touched on this, but the last sentence there identifies, it says, hey, last and worth mentioning, several of the cannabis retail establishments are replacing existing tenants and properties that have had histories of code enforcement actions related to their business operations and site maintenance. So here's what I'm thinking when I saw that. I wouldn't be too keen on seeing as a rationale for approving a cannabis business that they're moving into a location where the prior business didn't do a good job of taking care of their building or their property, and therefore this is going to be an upgrade for that neighborhood. I wouldn't look at that issue that way. I would look at the issue more as a failing of our code enforcement making a business comply with proper and safe maintenance. So I understand your point here, and it's a point well made, but I would never consider that as a rationale for approving a new business coming in because they're going to do a better job of taking care of the landscaping than the last guy. That would not sway me. I just, full disclosure.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Zick. And staff did have this discussion after the staff report was written and published, and decided that that was exactly the way we looked at it as well, as a red flag for that. But really the intent of it was for properties that have deferred maintenance and maybe do not approach the level of a code enforcement issue, although some of them have. And that was discussed with staff prior to writing the report. And that's why it ended up in the report. But like you said, it really is in response to a lot of these CUP applications that are proposing numerous site and tenant improvements, landscaping improvements, facade improvements to properties that, basically have not been updated in a long time.
Okay. Excellent report. Thank you for the answers to my questions. Look forward to your next report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Commissioner Toller, do you have any questions? Commissioner Rojas? Okay. I'll have some questions in a minute, but I'm going to open this for public comment. Any member of the public wishing to speak to this who's in chambers, please come up to the podium. I see none coming forward. Are there any phone calls or Zoom people that?
No, there is not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So I'll actually close public comment. So I think just generally, I think, as each one of these comes forward, I noted on the security, the requirement for video surveillance. I think, since that's going to be a requirement, I think just generally as a condition, I would ask that any operator of a retail cannabis business would be required to turn over any video surveillance files or data to upon request to the Costa Mesa Police Department. I don't know that it's in there, but it should be. I didn't see it in the, and I see Scott, you're kind of nodding like I think it is, but yeah, I think generally, I think CMPD has to have access to those video files upon request. I don't know if there's a reasonable amount of time or if they can turn it over directly, but if there's an emergent situation that they need that data quickly, then that needs to be in conditions for the operators. Vice Chair Zick asked my question about whether we required armed security or not. I think it is, I don't even think in Santa Ana they require it, but I know that there's some storefronts where they are armed security and others aren't. So I think that's fine. I'd be interesting to, well, never mind. So I appreciate all the commissioners diving in and really looking at this really hard and asking really good questions. I would just counsel that the regulations that are in place are the product of a lot of hard work of staff, a lot of deliberation from this body, and certainly a lot of deliberation on the part of the city council, who is the authority that put these regulations in place. I think at this stage, as we're about to start looking at these applications, that those are the regulations they're most comfortable with. And I don't have any desire at this point to say to council, boy, before we dive in, we really ought to consider this, or that we'd like you to consider that. I think we need to kind of get these applications moving. I know the city has made some budget assumptions on revenue for this fiscal year, which is over in 4 months. So I'm comfortable with the level of regulation. One of the things that Commissioner Vivar was talking about that I have some outlying potential concern about, and I've seen this in other jurisdictions on shopping centers where I'm processing applications, is some cities like to, if you're going to do some kind of redevelopment of a center, or you're going to do some broad amendments to a master CUP that governs the center, a lot of jurisdictions like to they want to see a leasing plan. where they'd say, give us an idea of the kinds of uses from a leasing strategy that you want to have in place. I'm not in favor of those because they make my life difficult in the private sector. But, I can see, I would have some concern that if in a small neighborhood center that if 3 or 4 retail cannabis shops displaced service businesses like dry cleaners or convenience stores, and that it forced folks who use those centers regularly to go somewhere else. I might have an outlying concern about that, but at the end of the day, that's the property owner's business on who the tenants are. I don't think that cities are necessarily very successful at trying to manage tenant mix in a center. And I just, I understand Commissioner Vivar's concern, and I think it's worth keeping an eye on. If the public starts showing up and saying, gee, I don't want 4 of these. I want my dry cleaner. I want my convenience store. I want my yogurt land, whatever it is. I get it, but I'm not overly concerned about that right now. I don't think these things are just going to fall out of the sky and be all over the city at once. So I think we'll come back on the 28th. With some final questions. I'm comfortable with the regulations as they stand. I'm comfortable with how we're going to process these. Staff knows the regulations. They know what they have to look for to see if an applicant's viable. I don't think they're going to bring an application forward that's clearly not viable from a regulatory standpoint. And if there are some applications where application of the regulations a little borderline, then that's why we're here. We make judgment calls, and if somebody doesn't like it, they can appeal it up to the city council. So, I think generally speaking, we're ready to go. My compliments to you guys. I know this hasn't been easy. It's a lot of work. It's a new business. And you're doing it in the midst of a housing element, and I know we're short-staffed, so I appreciate everything that you've done. I'm comfortable. I'm ready to go. Let's start looking at these things as soon as possible. So, anybody else have any comments? Commissioner Toller.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Chair, that I think this is a great thing we've put together. Everybody's worked hard on this, and I'm comfortable with everything. I don't have an answer to this, but I do have the same discomfort with the idea of displacement, right? I don't think there's a government solution to that. And it is the property owner's business. It's the market, right? But, the businesses are accepting cash to leave, right? It's their choice. But on the other hand, retail's having a hard enough time as it is, post-COVID, post-Amazon. When it comes to the idea of making our city into a collection of complete neighborhoods, that word complete means stuff within reach, within reasonable reach. And if I don't want to romanticize it, but I think you guys said a baker, a flower shop, a barber, if I lost my neighborhood, service, and it turned into a dispensary, that'd be a bummer, right? But I don't know what the solution is to that. So anyway, thank you guys.
Commissioner Arith, any comments?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair.
Commissioner Ross? Okay. Commissioner Vivar, any final comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, again, great presentation, city staff, and thank you for all of your hard work. I can't imagine how many hours you're putting into this outside of the regular 9 to 5. So thank you for that. And thank you for the involvement as well of the other commissioners on this. Very interesting questions, very interesting insights I hadn't considered from the perspectives of the others. I do maybe want to circle back to one thing that the Commissioner Russell said earlier about the something kind of applicable to everything regarding the flyers and a sort of general prohibition on those on the grounds, especially of them not landing in the hands of children or litter. So I know that obviously this has already gone through City Council. I know this went through a joint Planning Commission City Council joint session last year, but I mean, I think it's worth thinking about some of these things and maybe what can we do in our purview of the Planning Commission jurisdiction as we begin to look at some of these applications pretty soon. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the hard work. Again, city staff, thank you so much. And I think that's it for me tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Russell, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, just really quickly, thank you. If I haven't said so before, the staff did a fantastic job on putting this together and answering questions and making it really clear to us. So I appreciate that, and I'm ready to start looking at applications.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we continue this item till our regularly scheduled meeting of March 28th. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Vivar. Any comment on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Vice Chair Zick.
Just one comment. So I'll support the motion, of course. But since other commissioners were giving comments that almost sounded like good job, goodbye, I want to reiterate my interest in the next promised staff report, and in particular, item number 9, which would be the conditional use permit findings that we would either use to justify approval or not approval. And you know my interest in that. I expressed it at our last meeting. So I have no problem with you bringing applications in front of us as other people appear ready to have you do. I have no problem with that, but I certainly would want to have some additional input from you regarding these findings, because unless you can help me see what would be an example of a failed finding test, every one of the applications you put before us gets the rubber stamp of approval.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor to continue item till March 28th, and that was by the chair, seconded by Commissioner Vivar. And a roll call, please.
Chair DeArco,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zick,
Aye.
Commissioner Rojas,
Aye.
Commissioner Toller,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Vivar.
I agree with that. Is my thing on? Is it on now? Yeah, yes, I as a second of the motion, I agree with Vice Chairman Zick and would like to see that at the next presentation as well.
Commissioner Arith,
Yes.
that motion carries 7-0.
Okay, great. We'll have one more chat about this, and then hopefully off we go on the 28th. That brings us to department reports. And we'll start with public services. Mr. Yang.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the Planning Commission, good evening. Our public services report is pleased to announce the advertising of the Wilson Street Improvement Project. Wilson Street from Newport Boulevard to Placentia Avenue will be reconstructed. The project will include new street pavement along with new marking signage that is consistent with the city's active transportation plan, ATP. Also to be constructed is a new pedestrian signal in front of Wilson Park. This project will be partially funded with Community Development Block Grant, CDBG funds, and construction is projected to begin sometime this June. Thank you, and I defer back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. By the way, Randolph looks great so far, so it
Thank
looks
you.
good. Development Services Report, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I have no report this evening.
Okay, City Attorney?
Thank you, Chair Diarcol. I have no report this evening.
Okay. We'll stand in adjournment to our regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting of March 28th, 2022. Good night.